On today's show, the Hawks face an NBA Cup game that's pretty impactful on Friday. In advance of that game, we'll talk on your mailbag questions from the first 20% of the season, a preview of the Bulls game, and much more. All of that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1851 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening here in mid to late November. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at Gametime. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. We're on Apple and Spotify, as well as Overcast, and we are on YouTube, so please like this video as you're watching it on that platform, and please subscribe to the show on audio and video while telling your friends about the podcast. We already have 3 shows this week, including a breakdown of Hawks Warriors on Wednesday evening into Thursday morning, and more to come after the game on Friday in Chicago. For the most part, though, today, it'll be your mailbag questions on this episode, plus a pretty distinctive preview of the festivities on Friday. The NBA Cup is obviously ongoing. This is an NBA Cup game on Friday as well. I'm also in a pretty good spot, actually, with regard to that competition, but that's coming up later in the podcast. First, though, we'll dive in right now to your mailbag questions. And by the way, as a reminder, if you want to send questions in, you can do so on email. It's lockedonhawks@gmail.com, or you can send those to me on Blue Sky at BT Rowland. You can send them to me on Twitter at BT Rowland or at Locked On Hawks, and or also at my Patreon at patreon.com/BT Rowland. All right. Let us dive in now with a question from Tuck, who says, "You try to be rational, but aren't you mad about the way this season is going for the Hawks? They had a chance to be something, and they are blowing it." So I'm not picking on Tuck here at all. This question came in during the Warriors game, and I'm sure it was pretty late at night. Maybe some frustration boiling over, some emotions. I get all that. I generally thought the reaction, though, to last night's game in San Francisco against the Warriors was probably a little bit over the top. Let's say, generally speaking, across the social media sphere and the online sphere, YouTube after the game, et cetera, et cetera. I won't rehash that whole episode I did last night. I would encourage you to listen to it. But the Hawks did have pretty clearly their worst shooting game of the season last night. And also, it was one of the worst shooting games by any team so far in the NBA season through a month. So hundreds of games. It was the worst for the Hawks and one of the worst in the entire league. One stat that I actually didn't have last night that I do have now, wasn't available then. The Hawks, this is actually crazy. The Hawks shot 7 of 32 on what the NBA describes as wide open shots, which basically means that they have at least 6 feet of room between the shooter and the closest defender. 7 of 32. 22% on wide open shots. That is hysterically bad. There's not much to add there. I did credit, and I'll do it again now. The Warriors are very good defensively. And yes, they had an impact on the game last night. But when you shoot 7 of 32 on wide open shots in a game, you aren't going to win. So there you go. And again, they're playing a really good team on the road. A team that has a plus 10 net rating. The Warriors are 11-3. They're very good. So it wasn't a lot of fun to watch that game. I had to miss every shot basically for the entire night. And they've had some poor results in the big picture. But everything else has been mostly fine. I won't say that's all rainbows right now for the Hawks, but still they haven't overachieved or anything like that. But I was higher on the team than most were. At least nationally coming into the season. And I still think it's been a pretty normal set of results for 20% of the season, 16 games, especially when you account for the stuff beyond the win-loss results of the Hawks being shorthanded, et cetera, et cetera. So for basically the entire offseason, the Hawks were at FanDuel between 34.5 and 36.5 in terms of their preseason win projection, depending on when you actually looked over a few months. And right now, the Hawks have played, of course, 20% of their season, 16 games. They're 7-9. That is a pace for 35.9 wins. So pretty much exactly what they were quote unquote supposed to be in the projections. And that's with Bogey, who's one of their best 3 or 4 players, appearing in 3 games and being bad when he's played and been rusty, etc. Hunter's missed 11 games already. They had the huge injuries to Kobe Buffkin and Pete Krejci, leaving them with a two-way guy who I like, but it's still a two-way guy. And Keaton Wallace playing 16 minutes a game for this team this year. And with all of their high-minute players like Trae and Ricochet and Jalen all shooting below what you would expect them to shoot over a full season, all that wrapped up, they're still on pace for what they're supposed to be coming into the season. I keep going on this, but I won't. But yes, generally speaking, I try to be rational and logical and level-headed, and there have been frustrating moments this season for the Hawks. The losses to the Wizards, of course, are top of mind. More broadly, they have some bad losses in general, but they also have two really good wins against Boston and New York that you would not have banked on coming into the season. And yeah, do I think that I would have picked the Hawks to be better than 7-9 through 16 games without any more context? Probably. I probably would have had them 8-8, 9-7, something like that. So a little bit worse, to be sure, but no one was going to pick them to go 11-5 in this stretch. And then when you throw in the stuff about, in particular, Bogey and Hunter missing a bunch of time and having games where they were really, really, really shorthanded, it's not like, let's just say this. I get not being excited about the Hawks being on this pace right now. They have not blown it up so far in a great way. I'm not telling you to be thrilled and be dancing in the streets. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that I think they're more like a 500 team as constructed. That's kind of where I picked them to be this year, 500-ish coming into the season, which is, again, well over their over-under. But the idea that it's been some like unmitigated disaster so far at 7-9 with the stuff that they've been dealing with is just not grounded in reality at all. So some of the reactions are really, really strong. I'm not picking on the question again. It's a reasonable one. But like they're not blowing an opportunity. I mean, certainly they could be 9-7 versus 7-9. Like that, if that matters to you, like sure, it matters. Every game matters. And they've blown some games that they should have won, like full stop. But I think it's important to like try to have some perspective, and they're not like having a terrible start to the season. Moving to the next question is kind of related. It's very related, I would say. Comes from Jack. It's more of a tongue-in-cheek question, but Jack says, "At least the Hawks aren't the Sixers, huh? Thanks for all of your work." So obviously, I won't expand on this too much because the Sixers are not the topic of this podcast. But I did want to kind of follow up what I just said about the sky not falling so far by noting that there are actually teams that are having crisis points right now, and the Hawks are not one of them in the NBA, in the conference, etc. Philly's 2-12. That's important in this podcast. That is unbelievable to say out loud for a team that's like very clearly all in right now in the short term and trying to be a title contender this season. Even the most optimistic Hawks fan hopefully would not have said the Hawks are a title contender this year because they're not. They never were going to be this year. That's not what the season is supposed to be. Philadelphia was supposed to be that in some corners. So, like, that's a disaster. Philly's been worse than the Wizards, worse than the Raptors. That's unreal. Milwaukee has a negative point differential right now. They've won more lately, but they're actually 6-9, and they don't look good as a team that's like all in right now. New Orleans is the injury team this year. Last year it was Memphis. This year it's New Orleans. They lost to the Hawks, of course, on one of those nights where I actually called it the Injury Bowl. But they're 4-12, and they played a lineup on Wednesday in which Yves Missi, their rookie first-round pick, was probably their best player. And he was not even a lottery pick in this most recent draft, and he's a rookie, and rookies are bad. So, like, I'm not sure what the message is beyond just taking a deep breath there, but to the question that I got from Jack, and again, thanks for the questions, always, the Hawks are not in a terrible spot. The Hawks are in a reasonable spot. One more time, I'm not telling you to be super excited. It hasn't gone super duper well so far. But if you try to look at the way that's actually gone with some context, they're not in a bad spot. And I think that's worth taking a deep breath. And, the game on Wednesday was maybe a perfect storm. People either didn't watch it or it was frustrating because it was so frustrating to watch them miss every shot, or if you didn't see the game at all and all you saw was the score or whatever, however you got there, the Hawks were supposed to lose that game. Like you're an underdog in Golden State. Anyway, I won't do that whole thing again. But to answer the first two questions, they're kind of about the first portion of the season. The Hawks are not lighting the world on fire, but I would not be super discouraged at this point. And if that makes me an optimist on this front, I'll take it. But if you're listening to this podcast for the last 8+ years, you will know that that's not really my brand. Like I'm more of a pessimist than anything else. I don't tend to be sunshine and rainbows, but I just think that the Hawks are better than people are acting like they are at this stage. All right. More to come on the podcast, more mailbag questions, etc. First, though, a word from our friends at Gametime. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. I go to a lot of basketball games, of course. It never really gets old to me. The sounds from the court, the buzz in the crowd. It's always fun, and the memories are really vivid for me dating back years and years. At Gametime, you get tickets for all kinds of sporting events, including basketball and hockey and baseball, etc. Plus, buy tickets for music, comedy, and theater as well. They have a new feature at Gametime called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets actually even better and easier for you for your favorite teams to see them live and in person. They filter out all stuff you actually don't want and only show you the incredible deals on great seats. There's no actually wasting time searching through tickets that you actually are not looking for. For example, there are awesome deals right now involving the Hawks and games at home at Gametime, including a pair of tickets that are available right now for $19 each, including fees for the home game on December 2nd against the Pelicans. That's an awesome deal, especially in Atlanta on a holiday-ish evening. And there's more of that happening all the time at Gametime. I love that feature with all-in pricing they actually turn on at Gametime, just so there are no surprise fees at the end of the checkout process at Gametime. And they also have the lowest possible price guaranteed, or they'll credit you 110% of the difference at Gametime. Take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets with the folks at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA. $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and use that code. It's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? It's Gametime. All right, a longer question now from Tan, who sends in that it feels needlessly risky to play your franchise player through a lingering injury in a season that does not terribly matter. Like, yeah, we don't have our own pick, so we can't outright tank, but now it seems like the team is back mostly to healthy. Now would be the time to sit Trae Young for a while if he needs it. No, I'm saying that as a Hawks fan and a Hawks member who knows the value of my tickets for games that I can't go to is going to go down and nosedive even further if Trae misses an extended period of time. And I still think that it would be best for him and the team in the long run. So obviously a long question there and a reasonable one to some degree. It comes in response to me talking about this last night a little bit about how I think, I want to stress that, not reporting, I think that based on just watching Trae and listening to what he said in the recent past, that he's not 100% like springy right now with his health and explosiveness, etc. I do want to start this answer by sharing some audio with you of Trae's one set of comments about this. I referenced this before on the podcast, but I'm not sure I've ever actually played the audio. So the question that you'll hear in a second ago was like last Friday. So 6 days ago, as I'm recording this podcast, after the Wizards game, they won. He came back in that game. He had missed the previous game against Boston, and the Hawks are not giving anything more on this other than the Achilles tendonitis that was listed on the injury report. So here's the question from Lauren Woods, the AJC, and Trae's answer back on Friday.
Trey, welcome back. Just how are you feeling with the right Achilles, and how did that kind of maybe come up over the last few days?
Yeah, it was. It's been like a lingering thing, like start the season, and so they just started feeling a little bit more uncomfortable before the last game, and they sometimes you guys stop me from myself sometimes, and so I kind of got some advice that I should sit, and the basketball guys were with us, and we went up there and won, and the team played great, and so yeah, it was just more of a precaution thing, and yeah, nice. Something I'm going to have to play through, and but yeah, tonight it wasn't nothing too crazy.
All right, so since then, I don't think anyone on the team side or on Trae's side has spoken about this in any on-record setting that I'm aware of. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think I am. I've done some due diligence on that, so I try to give you as much as I possibly can here, and there's nothing else to add on the injury front. He is not listed on the injury report, so that's one thing. Having covered the league for 14 years in depth, I will tell you there are always injuries that are not listed on the injury report. Is that the way it's supposed to be? No, but especially for guys just have lingering injuries sometimes, and if there's no risk of them missing the game, they don't get listed on the injury report. That is what it is. But let's just say this. Tiny sample size since then. It's been 4 games. Trae's taking 13.3 shots per game from the field over that sample size. In the first 11 games, he attempted fewer than 14 shots only once. So he's actually averaging 13 shots a game in the last 4. Before that, he was always taking more than that per game. Always. Other than once. And shot attempts are not the only indicator. I will be the first to say that. Like, for instance, I thought he played well in Sacramento, despite taking only 7 shots in that game. He had 19 assists. But you could also say that he was pretty passive as a scorer in that game, which I think is fair. The one big game he actually had as a scorer recently was the Portland game, and he only took 16 shots. He just shot the ball fantastically in that game. 50% from 3, etc. And in case I need to say this plainly, I'll just make it very, very clear. I'm not trying to give anybody excuses or whatever. He can and needs to play better than he has the last couple of weeks. I'm not explaining it away by this. He would be the first to say that. In fact, I think he has said that multiple times post games. He's got to be better. The Hawks are not going to be their best self without Trae being his best self. That's just what it is. But the only mechanism that I know, if a player isn't feeling normal, is for them to actually tell you otherwise. I think Trae using the word lingering in that answer I played you and saying that it would be something he had to play through and then he got advice to sit and they have to kind of manage it and save him from himself. Like, he didn't say any of that stuff. And I think it tends to be true when that stuff is said out loud. How much of that is affecting him, we just don't know. And again, I'm not trying to give him a blanket pass. If he's not playing well physically, he should communicate that, and he should probably sit. Like, I'm not saying otherwise. Like, I think it's reasonable context to include this after watching every game of his career. Like, sometimes you just know when guys are not 100% healthy and they don't have the same spring. But back to the question about whether they should actually sit him, it's entirely medical. on some level. Like if there is a risk of him getting any worse, then yeah, you got to sit him. If there's a thought that he might get better if he takes a week off or 10 days off, then sure, you think about that for sure. But maybe that's not what we've thought about this. We don't know the answer to that. We won't know, and the Hawks simply won't tell us. They just don't tell us anything like that. And I'm big on not saying things from the outside that I don't know to be true in definitive fashion. That's why I'm couching this hard. This is my opinion and what I have seen with my eyes, not reporting. It does help to have Bogey and Kobe and Veet back, even if Bogey looks really bad so far. By the way, on this, if you're worried about Bogey, like I wouldn't be. I saw some crazy takes today about how Bogey is terrible and shouldn't play. He was awful last night. I made that very clear on the podcast. Bogey was the best reserve in the NBA last season. Acting like he's just cooked now is kind of silly. Anyway, they do have guys back. And back to the question, I think they would be in trouble still over a big sample size without Trae, and they do know that. I think the Hawks know that, basically. And I'm sure people were going to yell and scream at me about this, about the Boston game, as if it means the Hawks are going to win all the time without Trae. That's obviously silly. And every indicator that we have is that they're not very good without him. Even when you include the Boston game, they're about 8 points per 100 possessions worse this year when he's off the floor. They have a minus 9.6 net rating, which is like the worst team in the league, basically level with Trae off the court. They're not good without Trae. That's not a huge surprise. They're built around him in some respects, but they wouldn't probably be the worst team in the league if you took Trae off the floor for 2 weeks, but they wouldn't be very good, I don't think. And anyway, as much as Quinn tells the media that to kind of ask the training staff, we're not actually able to do that. So it's kind of shrouded in mystery. I can only share what my eyes see, what I might hear behind the scenes, and maybe he's fine. That actually might be true. Maybe he's fine and he's not in a rhythm right now as a scorer. That does happen sometimes over a long sample size, but I tend to think, having watched him a lot for hundreds of games in his NBA career, that he's not 100% healthy right now. That's my estimation. But again, one more time to be very frank about this, he's got to be better for them to win at the level that they actually want to win at. So if they need to rest him, maybe that's going to be what it is. If he's got to get something done, whatever. We'll see how he looks on Friday. That's the next sample size. He'll be asked again, I'm sure, in the near future. But for now, I played the audio for you. That's all we know right now. And I'm not trying to overstate it either. When people ask me why he's struggling, it's hard to not include that. But his 2-point shooting is like a good example of this. Like, it's not been good this year. Like, and you have to look beyond field goal percentage for Trae. He gets to the line a lot, takes a lot of threes, but he currently is shooting his career worst numbers from inside the arc. That is usually an indication that something's not 100% right. Now, sometimes he misses floaters, whatever. Anyway, I'll stop there for now and just say he has to be better, and hopefully he looks springier and more physically normal as the season progresses. All right, question from Ashton. Why can't the Hawks play 11 guys like the Warriors do? And also, are the Hawks trying to win, or are they trying to develop players? From what I've seen, it should be more of Larry Nance and less of Kobe Buffkin. Okay, a lot to get to here from this question. When we get more info than one game on the rotation with everybody available, I will probably do a larger rotation deep dive. That's not really a reason for me to do that right now after basically one game when I had everybody, literally one game. But for one, the Warriors are the exception to the rule here. It's been a topic all year long, actually, across the league, that Golden State is doing something that's actually quite unusual, playing 11 or 12 guys in a rotation. In fact, literally today, Howard Beck wrote an entire piece about it, about how crazy and weird and not usual it is that they're playing this many guys. So, like, yes, they're doing it. There's nothing wrong with it, but that's not the norm. That's the outlier, actually. It's obviously working for them. They have good depth this year, but that is more of an outlier than the Hawks playing 9 guys, for example. I saw a strange amount of outrage or consternation with the Hawks playing 9 guys on Wednesday, when that is a extremely normal rotation. In fact, it's probably the most normal rotation that a team can play is when they're fully healthy, to have like their kind of top 9 in the regular season. In the playoffs, it's actually usually like 8, maybe 7.5. But it wasn't a back-to-back. No one played a lot of minutes. One guy, Jalen, played more than 31 minutes last night. They weren't running guys into the ground. And yes, could there be some more creativity and like targeted nature about rotations and like certain guys, certain matchups, like maybe play Nance sometimes, play Veet sometimes. That's fine with me. I would be okay with some creativity there. But it is definitively not weird or strange or outlier or whatever or bad or negative to play 9 guys in an NBA game. That's a very, very, very normal thing. For a recent example, the biggest game of the year in the NBA so far was Tuesday night, Cavs-Celtics, NBA Cup game. Cleveland was undefeated. Boston's the reigning champions, et cetera, et cetera. And both teams played 8 guys in that game in 48 minutes in a close game. This is not out of the ordinary. Again, can you play more than 9? Absolutely you can. But like the idea that it's like more common to play 11 than 9 is just wrong. And Quinn, he's not really candid about many things. He's actually said he prefers to play 9 versus 10. But he's also been more than willing to play more than 9. Like, it will not surprise me in the slightest on Friday if they play more than 9 guys. Not even a little bit. You might see Nance, you might see Veet, you might see Garrison, you might see more. They could play 11. I wouldn't fall on the floor. But again, 9 is very normal. On the Buffkin part, I'm going to save a deeper dive on him for later on too. Again, when the sample size is not incredibly small, he's played 2 games this year, and he's played 226 minutes in his career so far. He's for all intents and purposes, a rookie in terms of like how he actually has played. He's been hurt so much early year two. And my big takeaway right now is that he needs to play to develop. Like, you have to learn about what he's going to be long term, and the only way to do that is to have him play. So yes, obviously Larry Nance Jr. is a better basketball player right now than Kobe Buffkin. No one should dispute that. Larry Nance is a much better NBA player on November 21st than Kobe Buffkin. But the Hawks have 3 centers. Larry Nance is a center. He can play some 4, but he's mostly a center. And aside from Kobe, they have 1 point guard in Trae Young. And yes, Keaton Wallace is kind of a combo-ish guy, but like, it's much clearer path for Kobe to play positionally than Larry Nance. And also, you want to develop him. He's a first-round pick from a year and a half ago. They're not going to bail on Kobe Buffkin yet. And I'm not saying that Kobe's going to be this great player. That pick was a good one for me. I didn't like, it wasn't like an absolute A+, but I liked the pick. It was a reasonable pick for me after scouting that draft. I think he might be good. He may not be. There's obviously a risk of that. He's never been good at the NBA level so far. But there's no reason to like write him off right now and fire him into the sun after his second game of his career, basically. Sorry, second game of the season, and a short sample size of his career when he's been good in the G League. He missed the summer. Like, it's kind of the same thing with Bogey. It's a little bit different, but Bogey looked bad 2 games in a row, and it was like the sky was falling. And it's like, I mean, Bogey's 32 years old. Like, yeah, maybe there's some downside about his age, but I mean, panicking about Bogey right now is a little bit over the top. It's a little bit different for Buffkin, but I would just say he needs to play minutes to develop. They don't really have an inherently better option than him in that spot at the moment. Like, maybe, yes, if they were playing a playoff game on Friday, I would probably advocate to not play Kobe and go with Dyson whenever Trey was off the court at point guard, or Dyson and Jalen together, or whatever. Maybe even go with Veet, whatever it would be. That would be reasonable. But they're not playing a playoff game in November, and he's got to play. So, like, it's not like he's unplayable either. I think defensively he looks fine. The shot hasn't gone in so far, but he shot well in the G League. I'll stop for now. I'll have more of a deep dive on Buffkin later on in the season when he's actually playing more minutes. We have more to go on. But hopefully answers the question. The rotation, like, I get it. Everyone wants to nitpick, especially when you lose. People want to go there first. And look, I always give my thoughts on the rotation every night on those on the post-game breakdowns. I give my rotation thoughts. That's an interesting part of the game. I'm not saying otherwise. But playing 9 guys is very normal, and the Hawks have a pretty clear top 8. They have 8 guys that are going to play every night that they're healthy. And it was those 8, and Kobe was the 9th guy on Wednesday. Maybe it'll be Kobe as the 9th guy and Veet the 10th guy on Friday. We'll see. But stay tuned for all of that. All right. In a second, I'll have a look at Friday's game in Chicago and the overall NBA Cup situation for the Hawks, because it gets very interesting very quickly beginning on Friday for Atlanta. First, though, a word from our friends at Chime. Today's show is sponsored by Chime. We've all realized at some point that we have this extra time to make serious moves with our money. You can take control of your finances by using a Chime checking account with features like no maintenance fees, fee-free overdraft up to $200, or getting paid up to 2 days early with direct deposit. You can learn more at chime.com/NBA. Some of us remember this, I'm sure, about overdrafting our accounts or having other issues. And Chime can help you make progress with fee-free overdraft up to $200. You also join millions of Chime members who are working on financial progress with no monthly or maintenance fees. Plus, they have more than 50,000 fee-free ATMs. And to date, Chime has spotted members over $30 billion. Friends give friends a boost. Eligible members get complimentary boosts to temporarily increase a friend's spot me limit. When you give a boost, they can boost you back to temporarily raise your limit. And to tell you how all of that works, first you set up a direct deposit in your Chime account. After a qualifying direct deposit of $200 or more, Chime will notify you to enroll in Spot Me. With an activated debit card, Chime will then spot you up to $200 when you exceed your balance. Your next direct deposit is applied to your negative balance, and Chime never charges fees or interest for using Spot Me. Make your fall finances a little greener by working towards your financial goals with Chime. Open your account in 2 minutes at chime.com/NBA. That's chime.com/NBA. Chime feels like progress. Banking services and debit card provided by the Baycorp Bank N.A. or Stride Bank N.A. Members FDIC. Spot Me eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. Boosts are available to eligible Chime members enrolled in Spot Me and are subject to monthly limits. Terms and conditions apply. Go to chime.com/disclosures for details. All right, and it's NBA Cup time again on Friday. And at the moment, the Hawks are in great shape in NBA Cup Group C alongside the Cavs, Celtics, Wizards, and Bulls. Atlanta is the only unbeaten team. They are 2-0 with a plus 13 point differential. They have a 1-point win over Boston and a 12-point win over Washington. I did note it then last week, but the Hawks probably should have won that Wizards game by like 25. And that might bite them later on this week. Hopefully not, but it could bite them. The Cavs are 1-1 with a plus 15 differential. And they lost to Boston. Boston is 1-1 with a plus 2 point differential, and they lost to Atlanta. The Wizards are 0-1 and minus 12, and the Bulls are 0-1 and minus 18. I could be wrong about this, but I think it's going to be a three-way race between the Hawks, Celtics, and Cavs. Boston still plays Washington and Chicago, so they could build up their point differential in a big way against those teams if they were to blow them out. That would only matter, though, against Atlanta in particular if there is a three-way tie, because if there's a two-way tie between the Hawks and Celtics, the Hawks would win it because they won the head-to-head matchup against Boston. Also, if point differential ends up being tied in a three-way race, the team that scores the most points on offense would win. But we'll save that for the hypothetical later on if we have to. The biggest thing in the short term is the Hawks beating the Bulls on Friday. If they can do that, that would be obviously helpful. Secondly, on Friday is beating them by more than a few points. The Bulls are not awful, as we'll talk about in a second. They did beat the Hawks 2 weeks ago. They have some strengths. But defensively, they are vulnerable to blowout. They've lost 7 games this year by double digits, and they lost a home game on Sunday to Houston by 36 points. So that could be a potential spot to win by a lot, but we'll see on that. And I will do more of a comprehensive preview of this next week when we know the stakes. But after this, the Hawks play one more Cup game, and it's Black Friday, a week from tomorrow, against Cleveland at home. If Atlanta beats Chicago and beats Cleveland and goes 4-0, nothing else matters. They'll be into the quarterfinals of the Cup. If they beat the Bulls on Friday, they could lose to Cleveland and still get in if things break a certain way. If the Hawks lose to the Bulls on Friday, then they have to beat Cleveland or they're dead, basically. But if they did that, it would be Cleveland's second loss, and the Hawks would probably just be directly in because they're playing, they'd be 3-1 with a win over Boston. So one thing at a time. It would help them to beat Chicago. If they beat Chicago, then they have a very easy path. It's just beating Cleveland, and then even have a chance to get in after that. But we'll have an update after this. But in the moment, the Hawks want to win and win by a lot if they can possibly do that. The other thing is, of course, that the Hawks are hoping for on Friday is that the Wizards don't lose by 100 to the Celtics. It may not matter, but Atlanta does not want Boston to blow Washington out at the same time. They might do that because Boston's a lot better than Washington, but that's the only other rooting interest beyond what's happening in Chicago on Friday. All right. That's the Cup part out of the way there, but the actual game is interesting too. It's a rematch from 2 weeks ago. The Hawks led that game early on and then clearly ran out of gas, in my opinion, and Chicago put their bench in the second half. They ran. That was effective. This time around, there is not a situation where the Hawks are going to have the huge rest disadvantage this time around. It is the last game of a road trip, which can be hard, but they should be up for this one, you'd imagine, with the NBA Cup in the mix. Offensively, the Bulls have been decent this year, taking a lot more threes with DeMar DeRozan gone. They're actually top 5 in attempts, but they don't get to the line very much. They don't rebound a lot offensively, so not a great offense, but definitely a functional one. Defensively, they've been awful for the most part. Bottom 5 in the league so far this season, and actually, literally, as I'm recording this podcast, they are dead last in defense in the month of November. So about 3 weeks, terrible. They're also dead last in 2-point shooting allowed and assists allowed, and they're bottom 5 in turnover creation. So without Caruso from last year, for instance, they have some decent guards a little bit defensively, but like this is not a good defensive team on paper. A lot of even their best players like Levine, Vucevic, Kobe White, not great defenders. So there's an opportunity there for the Hawks to score. We'll see if they're actually able to do that. On the injury front, The Bulls have two relatively high-profile absences. Patrick Williams and Lonzo Ball are out for the Bulls in this game. Not their best players, but still guys who like factor for them on some level. And the Hawks, for the second game in a row, as of right now, as a knock on wood, are playing healthy on Friday. The only injury on the roster right now is Seth Lundy. He's still hurt with the ankle, and he's also still in the G League right now as I'm recording this podcast, alongside Don Barlow and Mo Gay. And then Cody Zeller is out. But as of right now, the Hawks project to have 14 guys in Chicago who could be available to play. On Wednesday, they actually made Keaton Wallace inactive, so they only had 13. But regardless, they should have, unless something changes between now and then, a healthy roster, which is obviously helpful in this game. Plus, they pulled the plug a little bit early on Wednesday, so they shouldn't be like overtired. We'll see on that, but stay tuned for that. And then our friends at FanDuel right now make the Hawks about a 1-point underdog. That's changed a little bit in the last couple of hours, so it could change more before Friday. But effectively a coin flip game, maybe 52-48 in favor of Chicago, given that it's in Chicago, according to the betting market. But the Hawks haven't set out to win this game. Obviously, the Bulls are going to try to. They're not dead in the cup either. Technically, they have to win all 3 games, but they have a chance. They're not dead just yet. So we'll see how the Hawks fare here. But also of note, it's an 8 o'clock Eastern time game, a little bit later than usual, but it will feel great, at least for people like me, compared to the last 2 games, which were 10 o'clock starts. 8 o'clock start Friday night in Chicago, and a little bit of a revenge spot for Atlanta, and a big game about the cup. Like, I understand some people don't love NBA Cup and aren't interested in it. I'm not telling you have to be. I find it really intriguing. And the Hawks last year, they were pretty much eliminated very quickly. This time, the Hawks are actually quite alive to make a run potentially towards Las Vegas. So if they win tonight, if they win Friday night, that'd be interesting, and we'll have more on that later on this week. But also, the games still count in the standings, and if they want to win this one, that'd be helpful, because after that, they start to, you face interesting games over the weekend, et cetera, et cetera. They have Dallas coming in next week, and then Cleveland comes in twice. Actually, they play at Cleveland and then home for Cleveland. Those are tough games because Cleveland is very good. So of the next 4 games for Atlanta, this is probably one of the easiest, at least one of the 2 easiest, unquestionably, on paper. So beyond the cup, you just want to get some wins and a chance to do that on a Friday. Also a chance to end the road trip at 2-2, which is a small thing, but if they go 2-2 on the road trip, you can't really ask for much more than that, given the quality of the opponents that they played, et cetera, et cetera. All right. That's all I have on this podcast. Please stay tuned for a show after the game on Friday as well. And please subscribe to the show anywhere you find your podcast. Just search Locked On Hawks if you need to, on Apple, on Spotify, on Overcast. We're also on YouTube. Please like the video as you're watching it and subscribe on both audio and video platforms. Download the podcast and help us be supported in that fashion. Check out our sponsors as well. And then also please check out our newsletter, which you can find more information on our Twitter page as well, which is at Locked On Hawks. You can also find me on Twitter at BT Rowland. I'm also on Blue Sky at BT Rowland, and also follow my non-podcast work about the Hawks at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thanks for listening, everybody, and hope you enjoy your Friday. And I'll see you right back here in the same spot in about 24 hours for more on Hawks Bulls. We'll see you all next time.